In this episode of the Project Management Podcast, we learn to apply specific tools and techniques to improve communication and convey trust, even in digital and virtual settings.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. I am Cornelius Fichtner. We are coming to you live from the awe-inspiring 2017 PMI Global Conference in Chicago. And with me right now is Sarah Gallagher. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. This has been a fantastic conference.
You are smiling from ear to ear. You have already presented and they invited you back. You're going to have to give an encore presentation.
Yes, I'll be speaking again at 1 o'clock today.
Yeah, so you must be ecstatic.
Well, sort of. So, it's funny, right? After you present, you're like, finally I can relax. And then you get the call that you're doing it again. And it all starts again and all the prep work and everything. But it'll be fun. I'm really excited.
How do you like the energy at this conference?
Energy has been amazing. So I'll tell you, this has been a different conference for me in that I came alone. And I don't always do that. But I haven't felt alone. Everywhere I've walked, everywhere I've gone, people have smiled, introduced themselves, taken me to dinner. So I've found friends everywhere and in every industry, every state, and many different countries. It's been amazing.
To the people at home who are kind of on the edge going, should I go to a conference? Should I not go to a conference? What is your recommendation?
Oh, absolutely do it. Absolutely do it. My first conference was 2015 and I went in both feet in. I came and I also spoke. I did 2 presentations. And so it was a first time conference experience and a first time speaking at a conference experience. And it was fabulous. I get so many great little nuggets of inspiration and ideas I can take back with me and a great network I come back with. So definitely do it.
Your presentation is titled, You Can Trust Me, Communicating When No One Can See Your Face, which is something that we're doing right now.
It's true.
Nobody can see our faces.
Yes.
What's the story behind this particular presentation? What got you interested in this?
Well, I think some of the best topics come from personal struggle. And in my line of work, I work with high stakes projects. So these are projects that have a lot of potential business reward, but if they're executed poorly, can cause pretty disastrous disruption. And in that line of work, I vastly prefer to do it face to face because often there's a lot of political agendas, complex stakeholder issues, and so fewer misunderstandings occur when you can just look someone in the face and really have conversations. And so I struggled with this for a long time, and I kind of made it my mission for a couple of years to just experiment, read, research, and get better at it. And so, I don't have all the answers. I certainly don't have a silver bullet solution, but my goal with this talk was to just present some of those aha moments that I've had, those insights, and get people rolling towards a better way to work online.
What tools do you use to connect to people online where this has grown out of and you learned from?
So I've done a couple of things. I do a lot of video conferencing, and I'm a big believer in that. I think it has limitations still that people need to acknowledge. It's not the same as face-to-face. We'll talk about why in a moment. But I do a lot of that, both with a fully blown technology solution where you walk into a conference room and there's cameras everywhere and that type of thing, but also just Skype on my laptop, which most people now have access to Skype for Business or something similar. So in my mind, there's really no excuse, right? Not to let people see your face when possible.
Well, sometimes in the morning.
Oh, well, that's true. That's true.
No. I always say I have a face for radio.
So I have been on video conferences with Germany, which is a 7-hour time difference, and I'm full hair and makeup at like 5 a.m. at the office, ready to do this. So I know all about that. And then of course, telephone, instant messaging, email, all of those things that people use. I've done that as well.
Let's take a step back and think about more not the digital communication, but the personal communication. Once you meet somebody, if you're in a meeting room together with them, what are some of the clues that we look for to determine if someone is trustworthy that we talk to?
Well, what's really interesting, and we had an excellent keynote yesterday that talked about this very issue. And the fact of the matter is what we do look for and what we should be looking for are usually separate things. What we do look for is body language. And what are they telling us with their eyes, and where are they looking, and what are they paying attention to? In the keynote, we learned that's not always the best clue as to what they're actually thinking. But what's really interesting about in-person communication is, if you think about people you've worked with physically in an office, right? All week long, you have all of these little micro interactions with them. You pass them on the way to the bathroom. You tell them a joke. You tell them a story. You pass along an idea that you had. And you have accumulated all of this data about this person and what motivates them and what drives them. So when you get into a conference room and you have to argue about something, or you have to push your way, towards a solution, all of a sudden that person is a human. They're not just a voice or an obstacle on the other end of the phone or on the other end of an email. And so, in a virtual environment, our goal has to be to replicate the humanity that we have with in-person interactions.
Mm-hmm. I had an experience once where we had an offshore team, and they were just words on the other side of an email chain. And one day we managed to finally be able to get them on a video conference. And just that 30-minute conversation changed everything.
It did. It
brought us closer together. We knew them. We saw them. That they were actual human beings over there, right? And they took the time. It was late for them in the evening to come and meet with us. And that just personal interaction that we had there, that helped.
It absolutely does. And that's one of the first aha moments that I had is, number one, the more that you can meet face-to-face in the beginning of a project, the better. If you can afford it, do it. But as you go along, have those touch points where they can see your face or at least hear your voice, right? Relying more on phone than email, but help them experience that warmth. And another thing that I've done is you can actually get in their physical space by simply using the postal system. So I had a stakeholder on the other, in a different state, who was just notoriously difficult. I mean, every interaction with this guy was just horrendous. And finally, I reached across on a video chat and I asked him to stay after a meeting. And I said, Jeff, I get the sense that you are really stressed about this project. Can you walk me through some of the things you're thinking about with this? And I swear to God, this is what he says to me. All right, I'll come clean. I hate project managers. I was like, okay.
One way to kill the conversation.
Exactly. But actually, it opened a conversation because I could see his face and I could see that he was kind of half joking. But we were able to have really honest conversations about his experiences in the past, what I was going to do to be different. And I followed that conversation up. I learned that he was a big Reese's Pieces fan. So I hear you're a gummy bear fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a Reese's Pieces guy. So I mailed him a bag of Reese's Pieces and a neck pillow with a note that said, use this every time I'm a pain in your neck. And just that act, that warmth of him getting something from me in the mail that sat on his desk that he could, tap into when he was frustrated was great. And so that's one of the techniques that I've kind of found along the way as well.
Okay. And for our international listeners, Reese's Pieces, that's a chocolate, right?
It's a peanut butter chocolate.
Right.
Think about like M&Ms, right? Or little chocolate round. Yeah.
It's
and
like isn't it in E.T., the movie? Isn't that what Elliot uses to lure E.T. out of the shed there?
It is.
Okay.
But if you have a peanut allergy, I would not recommend them. But
yeah. One of your slides in the presentation that caught my eye, it's like, oh, what is this? Uncertainty tax. What is the uncertainty tax?
So it's an idea, and I came up with the term, but for lack of a more creative one, probably. But it's based on a first principle called the trust tax, which is in the book The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey. So that's the son of the Stephen Covey we all know and love, right? And so he talks about the trust tax as a very real economic price that we pay to varying degrees based on how well we trust each other. So when we don't trust each other, we pay it a real cost in terms of redundant decision makers, time wasted, employee turnover due to toxic environments. So we're all paying this regardless of how we're communicating. But there's an additional challenge with digital virtual communication. That challenge is social distance, which is the degree of interpersonal connection that we feel with each other, which happens to be much easier to narrow that social distance when we're in person. When we're digital, we're remote from each other. We don't see that human aspect, right? And so when we get an email, it's just a one-word email or a one-sentence email. we're uncertain about how we should interpret it. And usually there's 5 or 6 different ways you can interpret an email. It turns out the number one predictor of how we interpret an email is our own mood at the time that we're reading it.
I agree.
Right.
I very much agree.
Yep.
If I'm in a bad mood, I'm going to react badly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the uncertainty tax is this additional tax that we pay simply because we don't know how to interpret the messages that we're receiving via email or instant message or telephone conference.
Yeah. Okay. One of the discussions that you do as part of that presentation is you ask the attendees to get together and talk about the question, can you be mostly trustworthy?
Yes.
What came out of that discussion yesterday?
So yesterday I asked this question. It's kind of a cheeky question, right?
Yeah. Sort of loaded.
It is loaded. Okay, so about half of the audience said, nope, it's a pass-fail grade. You either are or you aren't. The other half said, nope, there's lots of shades of gray. What I offered up was an option C, which is, most often when we think of the word trust, what comes to mind is integrity and ethics, which in most of our minds, there is a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, right? And if you do enough things wrong, you have lost your trust, and it doesn't take a lot to lose trust, right? So that's one way of looking at it. But I like to think about trust as multifaceted, that there's 4 parts to it, and you can do really well at some of them and not well at others. And so those 4 cores of trust are integrity, intent, capability, and results.
And these are also the 4 core values that your presentation centers around, right?
Exactly, because all 4 of them are much harder to get across and to build in a virtual environment. Mm-hmm. So that first one, integrity, is what most people think of when they think of trust. And integrity is incredibly important, but what's really interesting is that we judge ourselves by our intent and others by their behavior, because we know all the reasons that we chose to do something. Someone else can only surmise what those reasons are based on watching us behave. And so in my experience, I would say only about 1% of the people I've dealt with in my professional career probably truly lack integrity. Mm-hmm. I mean, truly over time and time again demonstrate that they have a poor sense of ethics. Very, very low percentage. But I would say probably 10% of the people that I work with unintentionally communicate to others that they don't have integrity.
Oh, how do they unintentionally do that?
Because they do things without clearly stating their intent and why they're doing what they're doing. And so they leave others to make assumptions. And when that happens, people can draw all kinds of conclusions about you and your motives and your agenda that you may not have intended for that to happen. So let me give you an example in virtual communication. Mm-hmm. Using the CC or the BCC line in an email.
Never use the BCC.
Okay. Yeah.
Never.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Never.
So
Be open. You never use BCC.
Exactly. And so let's narrow our discussion then on the CC line, which is where it gets a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah.
So let's pretend that you got an email from a peer and they've CC'd your mutual boss. Again, multiple ways to interpret this, right? Let's say you're in a really good mood and you see that and you assume no negative intent. How are you interpreting? Why do you think he or she CC'd your boss?
To keep them in the loop.
Exactly. Okay. So that's great. Let's say you've had a really bad day and you're in a terrible mood and you kind of are in that zone of you feel
Snitch.
like everybody's exactly.
Snitch, why are you telling my boss about this?
Right. I had a guy that I knew whose coworkers used to call him the blame thrower because of his poor use of the CC line, right? And in his mind, he's just trying to keep people in the loop, but because he overused it and people were interpreting it incorrectly, people assumed he was really out for himself. And I don't really believe that was true of him. Yeah. And so that's a really good example of how this can get us into trouble.
Okay, so integrity. Oftentimes when you work together in the same physical space, it's much easier to show integrity and people get to know you over time. We talk at coffee, you talk about your family. It's so much easier to show who you truly are.
Right.
Now let's take this into the digital space where nobody sees your face. How do I show integrity?
So one of the key ways that you can show integrity is to be congruent. So are you familiar with the term congruent in math, like congruent shapes?
No.
Okay, congruent shapes are shapes that are completely identical, but one of them may be rotated slightly to the right, one of them might be flipped, but you could always rotate it back and flip it back, superimpose the two shapes, and they'd be identical.
Okay.
So that's the way to think about ourselves. We have a character, things that we value, right? Those should never change, no matter who we're talking to, whether we're talking to a boss or someone that we manage. And so we've got to be consistent across those things. And so when we're doing virtual communication, think about having IM chat windows up, right? Have you ever had 4 or 5 or more of those open at the same time? So each of those... We
currently have X projects going on and just beeps constantly.
Exactly. And so as you have all those windows open, the way to think about those is a whole different orientation or context. And the key is you have to be the same person or the same shape in all of those contexts. So have you ever had the experience of accidentally opening up the wrong chat window and chatting something that maybe you didn't mean to do that? And every time
Send
I think
to all, that's about the same
that's
thing.
a very similar thing, right? So always thinking to yourself, especially in any written communication, if this were posted on a bulletin board somewhere, would I feel comfortable with who I'm being in this moment? And I think number one, the best way to have integrity is to have integrity, right? And don't let that slip simply because you're working in a virtual environment.
There's also the party setting that I've heard. It's like, would you say this if you were in sort of an 5 o'clock party mingling environment and you walked up to somebody? Would you say this to that person?
Right. I love that. I love that.
And remember, you both have a glass of champagne in your hand at that point.
Exactly. So you can be loose. You can have a personality. I never want this to come across as that you have to be very stunted or stilted and stiff in the way that you approach people. Is again, humanity is the key. You can be funny and warm and all of those things and still be genuine and considerate and putting the best interests of others first.
Next is intent. Let me take you back to the example you had with the blame thrower. What do you think his intent was by adding so many people onto CC constantly?
I think what had happened is that he had been burned too many times by not keeping the right people in the loop or someone doing something that he wasn't in the loop. And he was really just trying to protect himself.
And now that we know that, it goes, aha. It's not a problem. It's just that was what his intent was. Tell us more about intent and the importance of it.
Well, the number one way to communicate and understand others' intent in a virtual environment is to say your intent and to ask intent explicitly. This is not something we do naturally in face-to-face conversation, actually. And so we overlook it in virtual communication. But so, for example, if I'm going to use the CC line in an email, I have now gotten in the habit of saying explicitly in the email who I'm CCing and why. So, hey, at the bottom of the email, after I've said what I'm going to say, Bill, I'm CCing you because I really want you to be in the loop on this. This may come up in a week and I want you to be informed, right? So you're just coming right out and you're saying what your intent is. In meetings, when you ask a question, following that up immediately by, hey, the reason I'm asking is, so you don't leave people to guess. You don't leave people to interpret that you're asking the question as a challenge to them. And then also, when you're expressing intent to others, is doing it in such a way that is less threatening. So let me ask you 2 questions and you tell me the difference. All right?
Okay.
First question. Why did you do that? Second question. What was behind your thinking when you did that?
Yeah, I get it. The first one feels, I felt attacked immediately. It's like you
it's a pinch.
Go back. It's like, whoa, wait, what?
Right. So when we switch our questions from why questions to what questions, what it does is it presumes that that person had a legitimate reason for behaving the way that they did. You just don't know it yet. Right. And so you've immediately put them at ease. You are assuming competence on their part and you're just asking for an explanation. And so I think just being a lot more explicit about our intent and changing the way we ask others about their intent really can put some humanity back into our virtual communication.
I think this is a good practice to follow, even if it's not virtual.
It's true.
I mean,
true.
even if you are in the same room with the person, if you are asking something that you feel might be misunderstood, explain why you're asking that and give, frame things properly.
And I think that's very true of many of the aha moments that I've had around virtual communication, is that many of the same principles apply as an in-person communication. And what you really just have to do is almost put an amplifier on all of those techniques when you're in a virtual environment. So it's not a matter of doing things dramatically differently. It's a matter of doing them more often and with more oomph than you would otherwise.
Okay. So we got 2 of the 4 cores done. We talked about integrity. We talked about intent. We're moving on to capabilities. What do you mean by capabilities? Note that I asked, what do you mean by
capabilities?
I learned
Already
something
applying.
already. Yeah.
Okay. So we can have the best intent in the world and have the most integrity in the world. And if we don't know what we're doing, or more importantly, we come across that we don't know what we're doing, right? Then our teams are still not going to trust us to lead them anywhere. And with capability, the thing that's unique in a virtual environment is consider that when you're working with a virtual team, you may only have a conference call with them once a week or once every 2 weeks. And that might even be your only interaction with them outside of emails or things like that. So they're having to make assessments about you and your capability just based on that call that they have with you. So if the technology doesn't work right, and you don't have a backup plan, or you aren't a very good facilitator in a virtual environment of making sure you have the full participation of people on the phone, or if you aren't enforcing those ground rules that you come up with and being a strong leader in a virtual environment, and again, people are judging you on your behavior, not your intent. So you might assume people know that the reason the call didn't go well is because of the technology. And in fact, what they're surmising is you didn't test the technology, or you didn't have a plan B and a C like a good project manager doing risk management would, right? And so we can get ourselves into all kinds of trouble simply because we wing it in a virtual environment.
It takes time, though.
It does.
Because if you're having a project team assemble for the first time, they don't know your capabilities, you don't know theirs. And if, communication in the personal interactions over video conferencing are happening so rarely,
right,
that takes a lot of time.
It's just like a charter, though, because remember, when I'm in a PM environment talking to non-PMs, and I talk about the importance of doing a charter, that's exactly the response I get. But it takes so much time. But as PMs, we know how much time it saves us later.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And for me, this is one of these upfront level setting things that is so worth investing the time in personally to make that call go right. Because if first impressions are everything, and if you can get that call to go well and get people excited and know that you're going to drive for momentum and you are going to support them and you are going to do everything it takes to make every hour that they commit to you on the phone worth it, then you have just really set your team forward into getting way past storming and into that norming performing zone sooner.
And I think this is when we get into bring your team together at the start of the project, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're going to put dollars anywhere in travel, front load them, put them at the beginning. Because you'll especially think about in the beginning is when you're estimating. In the beginning is when you are identifying risk. Both of those activities, we talk about them often in a very technical sense, but the bottom line is they require a lot of trust. Giving an estimate, just the act of giving an estimate that you both agree to work towards, requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability. And if we haven't taken the time to build our teams, this applies virtual or non-virtual, early on. And then the first thing we ask them to do is give us estimates. I mean, that's sort of like meeting someone for the first time and saying, tell me all about your childhood. I mean, like it's a vulnerable activity. So
yeah. Or me walking up to somebody at a Congress going, hey, subscribe to my podcast.
Exactly.
That would be the worst thing to do. All right. Capabilities was third. And then last we have results.
Yes. This is very similar to capabilities, except you can prove general competency. For example, I could run that first call so well. And then in the end, I get to results and I just can't make it happen with my team. I don't have a good track record of success, or the project is off the rails, right? So results is incredibly important, and they're kind of harder to achieve in a virtual environment. So as an example, when you're in an in-person meeting as PMs, we know that when we have action items, we need to figure out who does what by when. And we're very trained to do that. But have you ever been in a situation where you get the what and the who, and you agree that you'll catch them later to talk through the when, right? Because they're in the cube right next to you or in an office right next to you. And you're like, look, if we can't agree on a when right now, I'll go chase that down later. And it's a bad habit to get into, but it's one that I think we're a little bit more tolerant of in person because we know we can figure it out. Well, in a virtual environment where you're only getting to meet with people every so often, if you don't get the who and the what and the by when in the call, it's going to be a nightmare trying to chase those things down later. So it's little things like that. Again, amplifying the stuff you do in a in-person environment, applying it to a digital one to drive your team forward.
Now, the next question may seem odd, but there seems to be a visual clue here in how you have created the design of these 4 cores on the slide. And the listeners obviously don't see this, but let me tell you what it is. The first 2, integrity and intent, are red. Capabilities and results, the second 2, are in white font.
Yes.
So is this just the design of the slide, or is there some thought behind it? Why are integrity and intent red?
Integrity and intent are red because if these are broken, I don't want you to spend any time working on capability and results just yet. You will be spinning your wheels because no one is going to want to believe you're capable, and no one is going to follow you to results if they believe that your intent is malicious or in any way not aligned to where the project is headed. And so for me, really getting real with ourselves about that. And if your project is stalled or off the rails and there's a high level of conflict, I always assume to start with that as a PM, I have to start with me. I have to really make sure before I worry about other people sabotaging the project or other people having a poor intent, that I first really ask myself honestly, what is my intent here? And am I being congruent in all of my interactions with people? And if not, I'm going to fix that first. Then I'll move on to helping build intent and integrity in the team. And often I will tell them what I told you. Hey, I want to start with an assumption. Tell me if you agree that probably less than 1% of the people we work with truly lack integrity. But the bigger number is the 10% who do things that we misinterpret or we don't have all the information on, and we assume that they don't have integrity. And I think we might be struggling with the 10%, not the 1%. Let's figure out what we're going to do to really clarify intent and get us working as a team again.
I really like what you said, that the only person you can change is yourself. You have to start with yourself. I'm a small business owner, and I mean really small. Until 2 years ago, I was the company, okay? Now we have 4 employees, 5 if you want to be honest. And one thing that I had to learn in the last 2 years is to sit back and assume that the person on the other side wants the best for our company. It's not just me who wants the best for us. It's everyone who wants the best for us. So if I get an email or have a conversation with somebody on a topic that I disagree with, I have learned to take a step back and go, okay, I am wrong. They are right. And as soon as I start doing that, the conversation immediately becomes positive. And we're talking about options, and we're talking about ideas that they have brought in. And it has changed my world. It has changed the way that I lead our team. And I think it has also improved, the working relationships and the working environment from the first, initial, this is my baby, it's my company. It was really a learning process for me to more, okay, everybody has a say in this. And you know what? If I take a step back and think, you want the best with what you've just said, then that is perfect.
I totally agree. And I think we spend a lot of time, and I've been to a lot of conferences like this one. We spend a lot of time talking about how to get people to trust us and how to get our team to trust each other. And I think those obviously are very important topics. That's why I named my talk, You Can Trust Me, right? But I actually end the talk with a challenge. And the challenge is there's a third leg to this stool. And the third leg is, are you vulnerable enough to extend trust to others? Because that is an equal part of the piece. And if you are not vulnerable and willing to put your ego aside and trust other people, that's about delegating, right? That's about coaching and mentoring and mutual respect. If you can't do that, then you're going to also really struggle with the other two, getting people to trust you and getting your team to trust each other.
All right. So we have integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. Where do you struggle most personally?
Intent. Absolutely. I believe that I have integrity, and I've gotten much better over the years about being congruent with maturity. I think that comes, right? And I've always been a person who is a learner, and I really want to improve my capability, and I'm very results driven. Intent is always the one that I think is a struggle. And it's not that I have poor intent, but it's why I've had these aha moments over the years, is I've learned a couple of ways that I can come across with my personality that lead others to think I have a different intent than I do. For example, because I'm very results driven, I am not the most interpersonally sensitive one in the world, right? So I can get very into the task and towards the mission. And I'm just catching typos, and I'm figuring out what needs to be fixed. And I am not necessarily thinking about the feelings of the person that put that document together, right? And so for me, I've had to be very, very clear over the years and learn to be clear and warm and humble in presenting my intent to others.
Okay. At the end of your presentation, people got up, walked out, but some people came to the front and had questions. It was probably a long line. What were some of the questions that people had for you?
People had questions ranging from logistical, like, hey, I've got people in 4 countries and time zone differences, and someone's going to have to stay up late to join a call. What do I do? To questions about, I have a really hierarchical boss who wants to be in all of my meetings, and it's causing people not to be vulnerable in listing out risks and issues. What do I do? And so I think most of them kind of had to do with honestly, questions that are true of communication and teams, regardless of virtual or not virtual, but they're just a lot harder in a virtual environment.
To close our interview, what is the one thing that you would like our listeners to take from our conversation right now? And more importantly, how do they apply this on their virtual communications?
Boy, that's really tough. I think the one thing that I would say to take away is a magnifying glass. Okay. Apply that magnifying glass to all of your virtual communications from the lens of these 4 cores of trust. Get real with yourself about which of those 4, and it may be more than one, that you're struggling with and that your team is struggling with. And then I've given practical takeaways in the talk, and the slides are available for Congress attendees for each of those. If that's the one that you're struggling with, here's some things that you can do. But bottom line is, treat your projects like a lab. It's your personal lab. Okay. So try things. Be willing to take risks. Be willing to try a new technique. Be willing to tell your team, we need to hit the reset button. I'm a PM and I know I should have all the answers, but I feel like we've gone off track. I feel like maybe my intent has been misunderstood. Can we hit the reset button and can we try again? Being vulnerable, being willing to change your tactics is really just key.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'm really glad that PMI is having you do an encore.
Thank you.
Because this sounds like a fantastic presentation. And I'm so sorry that so many people won't be able to see you in action.
Oh, that's great. That's fine. I'm excited to take this on the road to some local PMI chapters. So
thank you.
It'll be good.